I will speak about what we do with families, with children who are adolescents, and were a pioneer organization. We started 30 years ago, and we focused first of all on separations and divorces. Later on, 15 years later, we started also to focus on mediation services for families with adolescents and who face difficulties in terms of living together, relationships. And over the last 15 years, we have we've supported about 800, 900 families. So you have quite some experience in this area. It's free of charge for all our families, and we'll explain how we work. We have work with the entire family on the basis of systemic approach, and the people can join us freely. We have family sessions of about 1 hour, and there's about 10 sessions per family in a treatment. Of course, some families have more difficulties and we need more time to help them, but the average is about 10 sessions for mediation. And when we started to work with families, with adolescent children, the first years we tried to use the family mediation model that we used for divorces and separations. However, this model was not good. We have a different experience with the children. We came up with our own model for treating families with adolescent children. And we have a specific tailor-made methodology. And we have been using this, we have put it in a guide, in a book. And we have a so-called systemic approach for intergenerational mediation. It's just in Spanish, but you can have access to it. You can also request it to us and then we can send it to you. So, and now, over these years, we have enjoyed with all the families, and we came up with this book. We have also free of charge trainings for professionals who work with families, and we explain them briefly what methodology is being used by us and how we work with families. We have workshops, and all the family associations can request their participation, and we provide this, and this is also gets subsidies from the ministry in the framework of the Agenda 2030. When we started with family mediation, like all new disciplines, we had to give it their own fields in comparison with other disciplines, such as, for instance, law and psychology. The first family mediators who worked with families came from psychology or law. We speak about family mediation. Yes, as I said before, that we want to make a clear separation with a separation. But when we speak about mediation for families with adolescent children, we have a clear approach, which we'll explain later on. Now, okay. I don't know if you are family mediators or therapists, but you know that mediation and family therapies are not always the same. Within these concepts, there's different models, different streams, schools, and there are quite different streams within mediation and family therapy. Within mediation models, we have called, for instance, Harvard, the transformative and narrative circular models. We speak about family therapy. There's many schools, many models. The most important ones are the structural one, etc. And in blue, you can see the models that we use. We have, for instance, the narrative circular model we use within mediation. We speak of family therapy. We use structural narrative models. And General Menucci came with this model, and we do also include narrative models. Maybe you know these models, and sometimes there's also kind of overlapping with themselves, and they share different fields of interest for us as well. And of course, when we work with families, with adolescent children, we work from on the basis of a systemic model. So we will widen our focus, first of all, with the first appointment, all the family visitors, the father, the mother, the adolescent, and all the brothers and sisters, because by doing this, we can understand what happens in a family, and then we can help them better. First of all, the family will focus on guiltiness and blaming. They always blame the adolescent, and we do not know that this is not the case. The adolescent cannot always be blamed for everything, and that is not a constructive. So this focus on the adolescent will be changed. We will widen the focus. We'll focus on all the interactions. All the people belong to the family, because by doing this, we can understand what really happens. So, and we understand what the behavior is of this adolescent, and they have a different behavior. It's a symptom that something does not work well within a family. For instance, a family, it could have fever, and then the behavior of the child will be a feverish behavior. So that's what happens. So we have sometimes, children who always contradict their parents. Sometimes this is based on marital conflicts or other causes. We have to have them all at the same time at the first appointment. We have to see what happens, and we're not going to focus only on the adolescent. If we had done that, then we cannot achieve a lot. At the first session, so all the people is with us, and sometimes, mainly at the beginning, in the past, we saw the mother with the boys and the girls, and the father did not attend the first session. The people did not understand what mediation was about, and the mother yes, said, yes, okay, well, I just joined this session. I will explain to the father what happens. No, we don't like it. We work differently. So sometimes we're not able to help these people if the father does not come. Sometimes it is difficult for these families to come to us. It takes a lot of time. It's expensive for them. But if the father does not attend the first session, we cannot help them. So we have to turn them down sometimes. And very often, when there was an adolescent boy who had a lot of problems, and he was rather conflictive. The point was mainly that the father was rather absent. So therefore, we need to have from the start the father as well during these sessions. And now all the parents attend the first session with the children, and then we're able to help the family and the adolescent, of course. And I like one of the sentences, which is now on the screen. It's a summary of what I will tell you. The most powerful resource to help person to change are the relationships of this person. So what we want to change on the basis of our model are these relationships that are established within a family. By doing this, we're able also to change the behavior of the members and particularly of the adolescent member. As you can see, these pictures are from our manual, mediation manual, and all these pictures, you see the people are dancing, the members of the family. And this is a metaphor from Salva Minucci when he spoke about the dancing, dance of the family. We try to understand it. We want to understand how the family dances and how we can make progress. It has to be a functional dance. That's a metaphor. So now, and obviously, many of you do know what mediation means. We speak about separation and divorce, but intergenerational and mediation is different. What's the difference? First of all, there's an asymmetrical relationship, and there's no balance. There's a hierarchy between parents and children. It is a functional hierarchy. When we speak about divorce, then there has to be balance, symmetry. When we speak about families with adolescent children, that situation is different compared to divorce, because then they live together. We speak about these families with their children, and in the future they can carry on living together as well, without conflicts and eternal fights. And there's another feature. One of these players is an adolescent with his or her specific features. When we speak with a family with adolescent children, if we focus on all the features of the children, because it's different to work with a child of 12 or 16 years old. So we need to have a good knowledge of every aspect of the child. We speak with families with adolescent children. In the past cases, we have to preserve hierarchy, or we have to restore hierarchy within a functional structure of the family system. And what's the most important for us? The relationship is much more important than specific agreement. Our model is not based on behavioral agreement. For instance, the son or the daughter commit to do A, B, or C. No, the relationship is of prime importance. We are working based on narrative models. So now, when is mediation not possible? Because not always possible to work with families. Depends on the situation. Because, for instance, when there is, for instance, violence between parents and children in general, when there is a kind of violence, a gender violence, then it's also not possible to do mediation. When there's addiction, when there's psychiatric pathology, if one of the members of the family, then it is not possible that the child can develop the free will or the free decision, and then mediation is possible. So the most important question is always for us when we work with adolescents, if they have violent episodes or not. And does that mean that we are not able to attend this family? It's not always the case. That's a question that we have to pose always. So now the response that we use is the following. No, if there is an episode of violence, sometimes we can help these families. And we use this scheme of these two authors, which differentiate the two kinds of violence, reactive violence and instrumental violence. When they speak about reactive violence, they speak about emotional, impulsive violence, when there's a lot of suffering, and it's more impulsive. And the adolescent, when it's violent, it turns to objects and things. And afterwards, they fear punishment, and they want also to find a kind of remediation. This kind of violence appears very often in families with adolescent children at a certain point of time. And if you address this kind of violence properly, if you work well with these families, then it's just an isolated fact in the history of this family. Normally, if we do not focus properly on this kind of violence, it could lead to the second kind of violence, the instrumental violence, when the child is violent in order to achieve something. So in this case, these children do not feel guilty. They don't want to remediate situation, and there's no need for moral behavior. So we are able to help families if there is reactive violence. If there's instrumental violence, then we can't come in. Then therapy is needed, and then some professionals are needed who are working at the same time with the families and the boys and the girls. And we need to have a kind of map in our head when we work with families with adolescent children. We have to focus on the life cycle. At what point of time are we currently? I do not explain now everything, because we can also explain this during a webinar for professionals, but you know this, I think. You know what a transition is, what development is. the birth of children, first of all, of course, the couple, the birth of children, etc. You know it. We speak about the life cycle, we make a difference. Two different kind of crises, of difficulties that will face the families. First of all, we have the crises which are related to the transition development, and the unexpected crisis. And what are the first kind of crises? These happen when a family has to go from one stage of the life cycle to another stage, and they get trapped. They cannot go from one stage to other stage. And what kind of crisis can be attended by us? For instance, when the arrival or departure of a family member, when it's the birth, and these kind of things can be addressed by us. Also, when, for instance, when a parent dies, or when the children are getting older and leave their home. When we speak about the death, I make reference to expected death. For instance, older people will die. It's not about the death of a child, because this is a not expected crisis. And we focus on families with a transitional crisis. But we have to be very attentive, focusing also on the unexpected crisis, because we have to see what the difficulties are, because then we can see if it's the first kind or second kind of crisis. Yes, the not expected crises are not related to the development of the family. For instance, when there's depression, illness, a child dies, divorce. However, divorce maybe should not be there on the basis of statistics. It's always normally already a part of the life cycle. But anyway, not all the authors do agree with that. But it's needed to trace these kind of crises within the families in order to be understand why the family comes to visit us. And we address it the first session. The first session, as I said before, we want to see all the members of the family, and we ask them individually how we can help them, what do they want to address, what their worries are. And we also ask them that when these difficulties started in the families, when the adolescent, for instance, started to face problems, if something else happened at the same time in a family. And very often, what happens then? Yes, of course, suddenly we can see that when the adolescent is currently facing or suddenly facing difficulties, the mother got unemployed, or the father was depressed, or a grandfather, grandmother passed away, and they were very important for the family. And this meant a change for the family. When posing this question, it's important, because then we can save time, because then a lot of topics crop up. You can see when these difficulties came up and what happened at the same time. That's important to remember, that we have to trace that at the first session, and you could do that as well. So, and that's what I said as well. We work with families that are trapped, that do not know what to do. They cannot go from one stage to other stage in life cycle, because people are growing, develop themselves, needs, interests of the members of family change, and the rules of operation, of function in the family have to change. And very often these rules and do not change, and the family is getting trapped. And then the symptoms appear. What are the symptoms that appear when an adolescent is getting difficulties? That's what I said before. And then we are, for instance, told that the family does have difficulties. So we have to focus on these difficulties then. So this is a kind of a scheme of our work. So there's a structure, a way of operation at the start, which is adapted at that point of time to the family. Then there's a crisis to work with the family to find a new way of functioning, which is more adjusted to another point of time, when, for instance, the children become adolescents. Now, here you can see, for instance, of course, the authors have different opinions. They have different life cycles, of course, but this is a summary. This is a scheme. And a left column, you can see different stages of the life cycle of the family. And in the second column, you can see the changes of the first order within a family. And the families are aware of this. They have been interiorized, and these do not cause very often issues. But normally we have to focus, we, the professionals, on the changes of the so-called second order in the right column, because sometimes the families get trapped with regard to these topics and issues. For instance, within a family, when we know there's like two members, there's the couple, and then they plan to get a child. And this is something of a change of the second order. They have to give priority to a new family compared to their family of origin, to the parents. And very often, when they're adolescent children, they've had a problem because one of the parts of the couple is sometimes still a child, is still closely linked to the former family, to his parents, compared to the ties with their couple. And this is what crops up. We speak with the families because then there's complaints. Very often, one of the couple says that they are sick of the fact that their husband or wife has always to have a lunch on Sunday with his or her family. The complaint is that your parents always take decisions for us. So then difficulties emerge, and that's an example. Another point of a crisis is the birth of the first child of the couple, and then a couple has to face change, but it causes a lot of difficulties. The first child's born, and then we have to change our behavior because we have to focus on three people and not on two people. When there's the birth of the child, it's very important to trace what happened at that point of time. We speak with families, with adolescent children, because very often we've gotten so-called absent father, and that is very often due to this kind of situation. But of course, what happens often, because then there's mothers that are so-called overprotecting mothers. They're always focusing on the children. And when we speak about his family, then we can, for instance, see that a child was ill when it was born, which meant that the mother was very worried of the child, and she was from that point of time always worried about the child and overprotective. Or for instance, a father, when the child was born, he turned to the child and the couple relationship got worse. So we have to trace this. Where we have to focus on when the first child was born, because it could be the cause or the seed for conflict in families with adolescent children. I want to focus on families with adolescents. So what kind of changes are important for us, the professionals? We have to be attentive because the children grow, become more mature, they develop themselves, and the families have to adapt themselves. The rules have to change. These adolescents want to have more autonomy, and these adolescents want to participate lesser and lesser in the family life. When the children are small, all the families work together. We work as a group. We all go to the woods. We all go to the cinema. And when the children gets older, do not want to participate in these kind of activities. Say, okay, Sunday morning, now I want to wake up later, and you can go to the woods and to do some hiking there. And then conflicts might appear, and there's misunderstandings. And then there's kind of confusion, and then the parents sometimes think that the children do not like to be with them, and still the way around as well. So of course, now this is obvious, but sometimes the parents find it difficult. They cannot accept that the children do no longer need us as in the past, and to reduce our role as father and mother within a family, because we're used to this. When the children were young, everything was done focusing on the children. Now we can change our behavior, and the first priority is no longer the care for the children. Okay, so now I'll carry on. we spoke about the life cycle, of course. When we work with adolescents, we have to take into account the following. We have also to focus on differentiation process of this boy or girl, how he or she will construct his or her identity. So, and there's two important tasks with regard to the adolescent, because he has to become autonomous, and he has to construct his own or her own identity. Therefore, has to find a balance between belonging and autonomy. We speak about adolescence, we think of the word autonomy. And the adolescents want to grow, want to become independent. What we do not always focus on the sense of belong as such, because the belong is important. That's where issues arise in families with adolescent children. And there's a simple idea. Maybe it's a very simple and explain it, but you have to take this into account, because all the parents and all the mothers need that their children, yes, um, um, uh, need to know that they have been good parents. And the children want also to be seen as good children. When the children are young, normally this will happen. The parents convey to their children that they are good, that they behave properly. But what happens when they become adolescents? This no longer happens. And when this no longer happens, then this causes sufferings and pain in all the family members. And this pain and sufferings will also be conveyed to us when we have these mediation sessions. That's very important. That's what happens. That's the underlying cause. Therefore, it's important that when we start working with these families, with adolescent children, that we have to know what the experience is, this family. We have to know what these fights are, because we have also to make clear to the children that all the members of the family still love each other. There's more distance. We have to make clear that these children, although they grow apart, that they're still loved by the others. And that's what I mean when we speak about this belong, this sense of belonging. It's not only about, you cannot only construct your own identity when you belong to something or some structure. There's an Italian author, Maurizio Andolfi, and he said always, when I see the adolescent who shouts and he does not like his father and mother, and everything is bad, I want to be in the outside world with my friends. What this adolescent states is that he does not like to grow. He does not want to become an adult. And what does he really need? He wants to feel that he has to reconstruct his belonging to the family. And Adolf came up with an interesting reflection. And when we speak about belongings, how many fathers and mothers are not being replaced by a video game or a bottle of gin or other addictions or bad friends? This happens very often. It has to do with the belonging issue, because an adolescent always seeks an adult. He wants to be with his father, mother, even only to be able to fight with him or her, because he needs an adult. So it's important for them. The many families we can see that they cannot no longer find the parents. The father normally gives up earlier than the father, because the fathers always think that educating means obedience. And if a child no longer obeys, does not listen to us, then we give up, then we move away, and then the symptoms emerge, and this could become very serious. And Jamet said that for the sake of our adolescents, we have to behave as adults. A good differentiated person particularly an adolescent has constructed an identity and can distinguish his or her emotions and thoughts, are less reactive in terms of emotions, and will not be very reactive and are able to regulate their emotions and can learn to act on the basis of reflections, and they understand themselves better. When we speak about interpersonal relationships, these well differentiated people are able to follow their own criteria and to be respectful with regard to the criteria of the others, and they're able to have important bonds and relationships with their surrounding people. When we speak about the adolescents, there's two cases of adolescents that we see, and it appears that they have a proper development, and you can see that they are having a good identity, but it's not the case in reality. It's a so-called pseudo differentiation. There's two kinds of pseudo differentiation. The first one is the following: it's a boy or a girl who always obeys. But these kind of children or adolescents are not autonomous. We see adolescents then who seem to be very mature because they're obedient, they're docile and responsible. However, in reality, these adolescents are not growing well. But normally, we don't see these children because they do not cause problems. When the father says white, then it's white for the child. If the father says you have to study law, then they will study law at university. So for them, the bond and the relationship with the parents is more important. It's more important than their own criteria. They don't want to become autonomous, and they don't want to meet their own needs, and they want to please the others, and therefore do not differentiate their own desires and needs from the needs and desires of the others. When we see that these children have issues, then that will happen when they're adults, because then they have difficult relationships with other people, and they cannot impose their own needs and criteria, and then difficulties emerge. And these children, we see them sometimes because we work with the entire family, as I said before, and the parents, yes, visit us with the child that has issues, that cause issues, and they say that is an obedient a child and is always behaving very well. And then we focus on this so-called perfect child and not on the other child, because it causes some minor conflict, but that's not the real issue which is at stake. The other kind of pseudo differentiation is the following, and that's the rebel. Yes, yes, you will see these kind of people as well, I think, in your practice. These are boys and girls who focus on independence. That's more important to them. And they do not want to be responsible. And they are not worried about preserving the relationship, the bonds with the others. This kind of children are in authoritarian families with strict rules. And that's why they only can contradict by being a rebel. Of course, fights and conflicts to a certain extent are necessary in order to be able to grow, to develop. But these children are always contradicting their parents, these rebels, and they always contradict their parents. These children do ruin their life project. If their parents tell them to study, they want to study. So they always go always in the opposite direction. And we have the following idea for these children, and that's what we tell them at the first session, because in reality, these persons are very dependent. They always depend on doing the opposite of what is told to them. So they row in the opposite direction. And does that mean that you have your own direction, that you impose your own criterion? No, you need to have your own ideas. Sometimes it tallies with the ideas of your parents, and other points of time not. Now, I spoke about when we work with families with adolescent children, we spoke about the life cycle differentiation. The third pillar that we focus on is the attachment theory. Family mediation will generate more secure attachment models for all our family models. I want to focus on the attachment theory. It's complex. It will take us days to explain it properly. We'd like to focus on the three basic concepts that we convey to the families with regard to relationships, secure relationship with their children, a secure attachment with them. First of all, the concept of regulation, connection, and thirdly, exploration. I will explain it now. Normally, the father or the mother is needed and he has to be able to regulate his own emotional states, and then he or she will be able to regulate the emotions of their children. And the adult has also to be able to connect his or her own needs and also to connect with the needs of the children. If you're able to connect with your own needs, then you're able to understand the needs of the children. And parents who sacrifice themselves do not have an appropriate behavior. Sometimes they do everything at the expense of myself. It's not good because not able to connect with their own needs, and therefore they cannot attend the proper needs of the children. So in a nutshell, if a child or an adolescent could explain this, he would say, I need an adult who regulates him or herself and can regulate me as well, and who's be able to connect with his own national needs and therefore is able to attend my needs. Regulation does not mean that you always feel well. No, it does mean that I am able to feel what I need to feel in an appropriate context. So sometimes I have had an issue with my couple, and then of course I can be able to be annoyed with my couple, or with my boss, for instance. There's two kinds or those extremes when we speak about regulation. For instance, there is the deregulation. That means that the intensity of the emotion, what I feel, does not tally with what happens. So I'm overexcited. I'm very, very upset. And there's also hyperregulation. Boys and girls do not feel anything when they should feel something following a specific situation. Difficult to trace these kind of behaviors. Therefore, the adolescents, or the babies, of course, and the children as well, but the adolescents are not able to regulate the emotional states. And they need a regulated adult to regulate their emotional states. They have to understand that when they feel bad, that the parents will help them, to support them. Why do I put this picture here? Of course, we're approaching Christmas. Now, I'm not an expert with regard to the Bible, but this reflects the escape of the Virgin Mary with Saint Joshua when the emperor wanted to kill all the babies. When we speak, why do we explain this with a picture? When we speak about secure attachment models, we all speak about the caring person, which normally is the father, and the bond with the baby. But we have to speak also about a triangle based on three parts, three actors. So the couple, so two actors and the child. Because what's the function of the couple? It is the regulation of the other member of the family when he or she is worried, when he feels despaired, and you have to regulate it in order to get a secure basis for the child. For instance, we see Saint Joseph here. He is here. He is regulating the life of the Virgin Mary. He conveys that we can stay safely. And what do we encounter often when we see families with adolescent children? We see mothers who sacrificed themselves when the children were young, or when they suffered from a disease, or they had issues at school. These families, or the mothers mainly, focus on the child. Child is getting older, and then sometimes there is a fight between the mother and the child because the child wants to be more autonomous. Situation not easy for the father then, because the father then questions and criticizes the mother, and they see us then, and the father states that the mother is always focusing on the child, does not give freedom to the child, and that the child should be more autonomous. But I'm sick of it, of the fight between the mother and the child. And what do we say to this father? We say, okay, what can you do? How can you step in? What should you do there in order to solve this conflict between the mother and the child? The mother has to be more trustful, has to feel at ease, because by criticizing, questioning, you do not help the family. What can you do for the child? Because you have to be present in the life of your child. It's not only about criticizing. And that's what I want to explain with this picture. The parent should also be as a regulating figure, in this case, for the other part of the couple. We have this attachment model, and we also focus on connection. We're always to be present now and here. That's what the parents have to convey to the children. We have to make clear that they always love the children. There should be unconditional acceptance, whatever the child does, even if they have an inappropriate behavior. The child have always to be loved and accepted unconditionally. So you cannot accept maybe what the child does, but you always have to unconditionally accept and love your child. Because if you don't do that, the child will become deregulated and there will be more issues. You have to look into the eyes of the other. And that's important for us as well at our mediation sessions. So at some sessions, we see only the women, the girls and the wife. And at another session, we see the father and the boy. So these sessions with the men, for instance, are complicated sessions because normally the man cannot easily speak about emotions, feelings, what hurts us, why do we suffer, and we always turn to our couple, to the mother, as mediator when we speak about these topics. And suddenly, then we have the father and the boys, and it's difficult for them to speak about these topics. And we say to them, okay, but you have to learn to speak about your feelings. You have to train yourself. Let's start with a training here. And then they are sitting, facing each other. You should not look at me. You have to look into the eyes of your son and your father. You can speak about your work and what you did when you had the same age. So we come with a series of topics, and that should be addressed. We don't speak about studies and rules, and then they have to train themselves to establish the bonds between the boys and the fathers, which is a difficult one. And the third concept when we speak about attachment is exploration. It's easy to allow this to allow exploration to a baby and a child. And they are allowed to make mistakes. It's easy to do it with a baby. What happened with adolescents? It's much more difficult for us because we're fearful. We do not know what could happen with them, what could happen to them. So when we do not allow an adolescent to explore the world, to experience new things, then there's a kind of overprotection, and that happens very often when we do mediation with families. Families that are fearful are very worried that overprotect the children. Overprotection and excessive control does not lead to a secure attachment. However, the families think that that is the case. The family state that I give everything to my child, but overprotection does not lead to a secure attachment. No, it causes very often violence. Therefore, we have to address with the parents. They have to address their children differently. They have to foster more autonomous behavior of their children. And what do we convey to the fathers and mothers? We state to them that we cannot avoid all the risks and all the worries that are in the outside world. But what we can do at home, we can create a good atmosphere which allows the children to express their feelings, where they feel themselves free. And when you listen to them, then at home, and then they speak a lot, and they're also then able to listen to you, and you can convey also your values, your ideas. So you need to have a secure environment at home. And by doing that, you are able to support them, and this will protect them when a child can be supported by the parents, then they are really protected. And you cannot achieve this by overprotecting your child. Now, the children with secure attachment will have better relationships with friends, with a couple. Of course, all the experts, scientists speak about the first years when they speak about attachment. They speak about the attachment of babies between 0 and 3 years old. However, that's new studies. And they also focus on attachments of adolescents and parents. And they focus on the change of attachment models when going from one stage to the other stage. For instance, when adolescents have a first relationship with a boyfriend or girlfriend, and then issues might come up. In families with a secure attachment, it's easier for the adolescents to think differently, to be in disagreement. They can construct their own identity because they know by doing that, that it will not be expense of the relationship with their parents. However, if there are insecure attachments between parents and children, situation is different. Because if the child wants to do something differently, this will be perceived as a threat. This could also cause fear amongst the parents and could lead to many issues. And that's are the issues that we address during mediation sessions. We see very often this sentence here: if you really loved me, you would not contradict me. So if you really loved your father, you should obey your father or your mother. You should do what we tell you. And these kind of sentences appear very often and are damaging to the children because the children have to be allowed to go in their own direction, and they have to be able to feel that they still belong to the family. So, but the parents do not consider it in this way. They see it as an attack if the children behave differently. Now that's it. I don't think we have a lot of time. I think it's also interesting to have an exchange of ideas, a chat that we can have with the people who listen to us. So one of the most important tasks for the parents, for the fathers and mothers, is mainly when there is an adolescent child, that they have to know what happens when there is malaise. We have to focus on the sufferings. We have to be able to organize connection between the different family members, and we have also to allow exploration of children. There have to be a secure attachment. We have to help the children to grow properly, and that's it. I think that's the speech, and open to all kind of questions from the audience.